Good evening and welcome to another exciting show. Now, tonight there's a little bit of a dilemma, or there was, because this is an alternative remembrance, hence the reason for the black tie and dark jacket. And I like to start the show with happiness and joviality and laughter to raise the spirits and end the show like that. But it wouldn't be fitting for a alternative remembrance. So what we're going to do is have a 1 minute, and it's going to be an unusual 1 minute silence because there's captions going to come on the screen any moment now. And after that, I think we can start a little bit of joviality. So I like to be respectful, and again, we'll have a 1 minute's silence, and then we'll get on with my usual, hopefully, joviality, and we go on with the show and introduce tonight's guests. So here we go. Hope you found that very moving. I certainly did. Thank you very much. And on with the show. Well, tonight we've got a fantastic lineup of guests. We have Professor Gloria Moss. Hello, Gloria.
Hi, Chris.
Greetings. Hello. And we've also got author John Hamer. Now, before we start, we've got a couple of call outs to do. So we do the usual call outs. Hope you don't mind. And first of all, the usual one, which is Abbey Health Foods. And it was thanks to Miles Fleetwood. I'll say this every week. Yes, he's got a crappy blue card, and it doesn't scan very well, hence it doesn't look very good on the screen. But he was the one that suggested we do a minute's silence because I had a bit of a dilemma how to start the show, because I wanted to show respect, and he said, well, that's a good idea. So I think it's excellent. Thanks, Miles. Much appreciated. And also we got a call out for I've got it here somehow. We've still got the if I can find it. Where is it? I've lost it. Here we are. We got the Yoga East Hearts. No, sorry, yoga. So we got that is Edge Crusher and Vicky. I was speaking to them yesterday. Yes, only yesterday. And I used this. I shook their hands. So there we are. So I've met some famous people there, and they do yoga next to the Kazi in Saders Park and loads of other places as well. You know, and I won't say that people come out looking flush because I said that last week and it's getting a bit boring. And but also we got someone missing tonight, and that's Colin. Unfortunately, Colin is not very well, and I think emotionally it would, because his father went through World War II, the same as my father did. His father had post-traumatic stress disorder, as mine did, and Colin heard World War II as I did, and we're not blaming our fathers, we loved our fathers from an early age, every day of their lives, because our fathers, because there's two types of veterans. There's ones that keep quiet about it, and the ones that that spoke about it. and our father spoke about it. So it's, you had trauma from a very early age. So I do understand. So let's have positive thoughts going towards Manchester, going towards Colin. It always works. So come on, everybody, please, positive thoughts to Colin and wish him better. Okay, right. Now, the other call out is to this. Now, as you know, I'm a member of 2 Dunfor University. And this is the Truth University. I think some people here in the show know a little bit more about it. Over to you, Gloria, landing you in the hot seat. Hello.
Well, yes. I suppose those of us listening to this program, including those taking part in this show, are rather obsessed, shall I say, with the truth and dispelling the lies. And so here we have a university which invites you to produce research projects, not just coursework that will sit on a dusty shelf and go nowhere, but to produce research projects on a topic of your choice that will help dispel some of the lies that are bound in the world that we live in, that have bounded for several hundred years. So if that sounds like something for you, do go on the website and have a look. And John, maybe you'd like to say some more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria, for surprising me with that question. Yeah, as Gloria says, it's a great opportunity for anyone who's interested in doing research on various truth topics to actually do something positive and actually make a positive contribution to the world of truth, if you like. It's something that I've obviously been interested in for a long time, and it's my life now, of course, as an author and researcher in that field. But I often get asked, "What can I do, John? What can I?" You're a writer, you're a talker, you're a researcher, but how can I contribute to this truth movement? Well, here's an opportunity for those who feel that way. You can actually make a positive contribution. You can do some valuable research, which will be fully supervised and tutored, and it will end with you producing a paper. It's nothing too onerous. I mean, it's something that will be published, so you will in fact become a published author. And as I say, I believe in it very strongly. I believe it's a very worthwhile project, and I hope that you will at least take a look at it and see what it's all about.
So, and then, as John said, if it once your work is published, it can be sold and go out into the world. A kind of truth bomb, if you like.
Well, we could actually look into that. And it's linked to academics' ritual stupidity epidemic, which there seems to be a lot of it around at the moment. Yes, what are the keywords? Oh, sorry, yes, sure. That's the long version of what it's called, you see. Anyway.
It does have an acronym.
Yeah, doesn't it? I wonder who could have thought that one out.
Mentioning no names, but his initials are Chris Power.
Now, the title, as you probably guessed, is The War Justification Industry. And the three of us are absolutely chomping at the bit here. Gloria's done a lot of research into it. And I was thinking, how are the three of us going to get a word in edgeways? Because we're all sort of things like that. So, ladies first. So, over to you, Gloria, because you've been looking. See, I've been looking into the word exciting. Just think of the word exciting, okay? And that's been used a long time in the war justification and the war promotion industry. Now, this is a poster from the 1940s and 50s. An adventure. It's exciting, is it? Adventure begins at 17 and a half in the army. Okay. And in the First World War, they said, you know, don't miss the excitement, and it'll be over before Christmas. This was in 1914. You got to get to the front before it's over, you know, because you don't want to miss the excitement or the adventure. And isn't it strange that nowadays we now have World War III, and people that, I won't say the word, you look at Dolly Parton, she was excited to, and there was some propaganda about teenagers getting, they were excited as well. So it's the same bullshit right the way through. Wouldn't you agree? I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what do you think, Gloria? And later on,
seems to have been going on for quite a while, several hundred years at the very least. And if we cast our historical minds back to 1095, Jerusalem was captured by the Turks, and Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in France, with hundreds of noblemen and clerics present, urged those assembled to go on a valiant crusade to the Holy Land. And I guess that excitement was the order of the day. And that excitement, I understand, was fueled by the promise of having your sins forgiven, and if you were a serf, having your freeman status restored to you. And on the strength of those messages, hundreds of excited people took off to the Holy Land. So, you know, it's been with us for hundreds of years, that the excitement, as you put it so aptly, Chris, of war. The reality, of course, is different from the propaganda efforts at the very beginning. And of course, it goes back further than that. I remember, way back to my school days when I was studying A-levels, and I had as one of my subjects ancient history. And one of the set texts that we read was a history of the battle that waged for several decades, featuring Athens on the one hand and Sparta on the other. This was a history written by the Greek historian Thucydides. And I think I made a note of what he said. He said he wrote his history, this is what Thucydides said, in the hope that, and I'm quoting here from Thucydides, in the hope that those who have blindly pursued the policies which have brought Greece to the brink and risks plunging the whole of Europe into the abyss, keenly the consequences of their actions. And it pains me to read those words, really, written in the 5th century BC, because that is a considerable elapse of time from the current day. We've had hundreds of years to contemplate the wise words of Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War. I mean, I wouldn't say this is necessarily going to make the New York Times bestseller list. It's fairly heavy reading, the Peloponnesian War, but I just want to draw your attention to one section in his book. And he describes a demagogue of the day, a general called Alcibiades. And you can just picture Alcibiades as, well, perhaps if we recall a young leader we had in Britain at the time of the Iraq War, probably you can think of the young leader I have in mind. Maybe Alcibiades was a similar kind of person. And he urges the Athenians to go to war against Sicily. Now, if you just picture the map of Greece with Athens on the easterly side, mm-hmm. Sicily is a long way away, is it not, from mainland Greece? It's off to the west. So here's Alcibiades urging the Athenians to go to war with Sicily. And this is what he says. He says, don't waver and change your minds under the impression Sicily has great power. For although the cities of Sicily are populous. Their inhabitants are a mixed rabble who gain and lose citizenship at the drop of a hat. And he goes on running down the Sicilians and how poorly fortified Syracuse is, how poorly armed they are, how unlikely it is that such a motley crew as the Sicilians could possibly win out against the might of the Athenians. What actually happened? It was a complete disaster for Athens. They lost, as in the First World War, some of the flowers of their youth in that ill-advised war against Sicily, launched on the back of the fine words of General Alcibiades. Can you see parallels with other wars that have been waged since then?
1974.
And before I keep quiet, I just want to say something else that I came across, which I found very chilling actually to read. And it suggested that up until the American and French revolutions, and maybe John can correct this opinion if he thinks it's wrong, but what this opinion suggested was that many armies were fighting with mercenaries, in other words, paid soldiers. So there wasn't any question of those soldiers needing loyalty. They didn't have a patriotic motive in fighting. There were mercenary armies, and the support of the general population wasn't needed in those wars. But so the opinion went, after the Industrial Revolution, the technological possibilities of war speeded up immensely. And we had aeroplanes, we had aircraft carriers, landing boats, tanks, you name it. Thousands and thousands of new forms of weaponry. And this panoply of weaponry needed to be supported by ever larger armies. So instead of an army maybe being the equivalent to 1% of the population, they needed to be the equivalent of 10%, with every armed person being supported by 10 civilians back at home. And that, according to this commentator, is what led to what exacerbated what we saw in that account of Thucydides and Alcibiades warmongering. It led to a whole industry of warmongering, or as you put it, Chris, the war justification industry. It is because so many people were involved in this industry that the war justification industry, a separate industry, if you like, came into being in order to propel 10% of the population off to war and ensure that an even larger number was supporting those soldiers. And so I guess that's why we're here today, to talk about the war justification industry in the wake, largely, of the Industrial Revolution.
Fantastic. That's fantastic, because what you were saying, I'm sorry I chimed in a little earlier, it was most rude of me, but when you said about Athens attacking, what was it now? Sicily. Well, think of 1974 with the Cyprus crisis, because I had he's passed away now, I had a cousin, he was English, but he married an Italian woman. They lived actually in Greece, in Athens. And during that war, Greeks were saying, right, we're going to volunteer, we're going to go. And they had a lot of propaganda saying, yes, we're going to go. And my cousin said, the Turks will slaughter you. Because when you look at the map, you look how huge the Turkish army was compared with the Greek army. And look how far Greece had to go to Cyprus, and how close Cyprus is. Look on the map. They wouldn't have stood an earthly. But it was all hype and that type of thing. And I mean, and the sad thing about Cyprus, I don't want to get into politics, but the Greek and the Turkish Cypriots got on very well with each other at one time. And it was more to do with America having a listening post in the Cold War, but that's another story. Now, people probably may have noticed that I don't know if I mentioned this, but the introduction, which a bit of a goosebump introduction, which was played with Wagner's Tannhäuser, was Henry V. It was an extract from the film Henry V. Or as when I was a kid, I used to call it Henry the V. Why are they calling him Henry the V? It's Henry the V, isn't it? I didn't realise it was Roman numerals, you know. And that was when I was 43. Anyway, what I was going to say is that that film was actually a propaganda film made in 1944, and if you notice that the extras looked rather Irish, it's because they were Irish. It was filmed in Ireland because they didn't have any men left in this country. So yes, they filmed it in Ireland, and the beginning with those horsemen, that was farmers, and they got extra pay if they brought their own horse. So seriously, but really, that is propaganda because it was to show film. And when you look at what, let's be blunt, bullshit it was, because could you imagine those in reality with Agincourt, the chaps, the archers, would have been training since the age of 7 years of age. They wouldn't have been able to have seen the king holding his sword up and saying went to fire. They would have known when to fire because they had to fire when the French knights were almost on them at 60 foot. They found 60 feet. And this idea of all the arrows go up into the sky and down, they would have just gone boing and bounced off the armour. They had to fire them very close for them to pierce through and kill the knights. So that's the shit of the bull, as they say. That's bullshit. And again, all this, fire now. Also, with one of those longbows or war bows, as they're called, can you imagine holding it like that? You'd be going, however strong you are, you couldn't hold them for very long. You had to bang, and that's it, But would you like to go before we go, John? Do you fancy going into chat for a little while?
Yeah.
Okay,
Could I just say just about that clip, for anyone who wasn't aware, that was meant to be a depiction of the Battle of Agincourt. And as far as depictions of real life events goes, that has to be one of the worst I've ever seen, because it was absolutely zero like that in reality. I can't even begin to tell you the differences between that clip and the reality. It was just so that, the two things are just so diverse. But anyway, that's just by the by, really. By all means, going to
that's what. Well, there's somebody who likes you here, Alison, John Hamer, the legend. I would second that. Yes, yes, yes. That's very good. And yes, he was it 20 quid an autograph, John? And
1999,
yeah, no, it's 10. There's 20 Fockham's, isn't it? They have to pay Fockham's for that because it's a Fockham Hall, isn't it? My own country. Louise Wilcox selling. Oh, isn't that lovely? Thanks, Louise. Sending Colin lots of love. Yeah, if we could all do that, send him positive thoughts, because he's a bit under the weather at the moment. So let's cheer him up a bit, shall we? And now we got here. Sorry if I'm not reading all your comments out because we've got so many now. I'll be all night reading them out. But thanks. We do read them over after the show, so don't worry. This is Greg Lord. Truth University sounds a great idea. And we got, I know who you are. Hello, Sue Jordan. Very nice to speak to you on here as well as when we meet. Staying in the park. Good evening, everyone. Town Crier, thanks for the link to the show. Yes, and thank you, Town Crier. That's it. And there we got here. This is off subject, but it's quite interesting. This is Paul Green. Hi, hope everyone well. Off the subject, but was in the dentist this morning. Was it I pull up? Phil and Holly were telling us not to put our heating on this winter, but to wear warm clothes in the house. Jog on.
Well, I think that's a great idea from whoever Holly and Phil are. Because that will reduce the aged population even more. So it's got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
Yeah. So, and also it saves on the old. That's what's his name? Bill's toxic arm brew, and we got here Louise Wilcox. And by gaining, this is what you were saying, Gloria. Sorry, Professor Gloria Moss, because you're a
No,
professor.
Gloria's fine. Thank you.
Hope you don't think I'm rude. And by gaining a freeman status, the serfs were given a surname, therefore enslaving people further. That's
Ah.
like your surname. Interesting.
That's interesting,
Thanks,
isn't it?
Louise. We've got a very
Thank you.
educated. See, we've got Truth University already, and as of course as my one, Dunfor University. And hello, Achi. You still like that joke, don't you, about Screwfix? Oh, forget the lies. Laugh out loud. Get Chris's Screwfix magazine. It's wonderful. You'll put a shelf up. I've just got in with the buds of my dog. How are you all? Love and respect. Yes, we won't carry on with that dirty joke about dating and buying Screwfix magazine by mistake. Anyway, I'm getting it.
Here we go. He's off.
Yes, going down into the Here we go. Right, we got here food machinery, food fabrication. Does anyone have a solution? Very good point. Very good point. Yes. Well, I have a solution. Laugh at the psychopaths in power. Now, let's have a look. Now, some spread lies, others know the truth. Who is who? Solution for life or for our masters? Or for what our masters are doing? Very good point. And I think we'll go back into chat a little bit later. And I don't know if you've got any more to say there, John, on because we've got quite a lot to pack in tonight. And my area is modern history, not ancient history. So I know bugger all about ancient history. But when you look at the war justification industry, people, I've never will think, well, hang on, why don't I wear a poppy? I never have done, never will do. Nor did my late father wear one, because he didn't have much time for the British Legion, which became the Royal British Legion in 1971. And a lot of veterans didn't have much time for them as well. And I've got the question, and that is, if they're supposed to be supporting veterans, why aren't they fully independent? And why is it if you go onto the government website, you can find a link that goes straight across to them? Because, yes, they will help a veteran within a deliberately disgusting system. But when you look at so many injustices after the First and Second World War, surely if they were helping the veterans, they'll say, right, we're going to bring London to the halt, to the governments, unless you do something. And we'll stay here until you do something. All right? No, they don't. Because in my view, I think, and this is my own personal view, they are a propaganda machine whose job is to project an image of veterans that best suits successive governments and to have a kind of glossed over image. And they're anything that, again, in my personal view, what they are possibly set out to do. Because when you look after the First World War, remember the conscription was in the war started in 1914, and it was a volunteer army until 1916. And in 1916, because I was running out of cannon fodder, they actually introduced conscription, and the troops were promised a land fit for heroes, a land of milk and honey. And what they came back to was a land that was in worse poverty than what they left, and that was due to the banks screwing this country left, right, and centre. Because in 1914, the Lloyd George, who was the Chancellor at that time, brought out what was called the Bradbury Pound, which was debt-free currency, because the country was virtually bankrupt. And then in 1916, he somehow withdrew it, and nobody knows why. Well, my guess, and I've got nothing to back this up with, is that the banks came to visit, and I can see John smiling there, and he's chomping at the bit. He's ready to go. Yes, he's fine. There he goes.
I think most people know that all modern wars, at least, not going back into the past centuries, but all modern wars are bankers' wars. All it's about, not all it's about, but the main purpose of it is it's just a money generating machine. The bankers control both sides. It doesn't matter. They don't care who wins. It's all about making money from the arms, the arms deals that take place. But it has a secondary purpose as well, of course, and that is reducing what they regard as being the surplus population.
Spot on.
Because, as we know, they're all eugenicists as well as greedy demons. But yeah, I mean, you were talking about the British Legion before, Chris. I mean, that is the very epitome of the war justification industry, because all this remembrance stuff, all these poppies, all this stuff, it's all about justifying wars that have happened and somehow creating this idea that it's glorious to die for your country, even though they don't actually use those words. That's the hidden implication in all the messages. And how sorry the establishment is that these poor guys have died, but don't forget they died for our freedoms. Yeah, I mean, look at the freedoms we've got now. It's great, isn't it? I am so grateful to everyone who's died, to give me this wonderful freedom that we all experience today. I am absolutely, words fail me. And by saying that, I don't mean to denigrate their deaths in any way, shape or form, because they were absolutely victims of the war industry, these poor lads. No question about it. They didn't die for us. They died for the bastards who sent them there in the first place.
I agree, and I do agree that we should respect their deaths, and that's why I am very respectful of what they did, and we should never forget it. Sorry, you was going to say, Gloria.
No, I was just going to say that you told us, Chris, that your father fought in the Second World War, and a lot of my family did too. My father and two uncles, three uncles actually, fought in the Second World War. One of those uncles I never met because he was so excited, shall we say, by the prospect of going to war that he signed up below age and went off to train in the RAF in Canada and was killed in training out in Canada. And my mother used to tell me that her mother received the telegram one day telling her that her son had been killed in training in Canada, that for the rest of her life she could always feel the paper of the telegram, because it was telegrams in those days that arrived with this devastating news. So that's an uncle I never met, Arthur Walford, his name was. And it makes me, of course it saddens me enormously to think of such a life lost. But it also, it moved me to look at the history of some of this country's prime ministers and their own family backgrounds.
Yes, here was it? Listen up, boys and girls, and hot stuff.
And, look, shall I say, I was a little surprised. This was during the referendum, well, post-referendum debates, and I just thought I'd look to see the sort of war histories of the families of the prime ministers that we've had, and there were three in quick succession. There was Gordon Brown, followed by David Cameron, followed by Theresa May. And I did a quick search to see, as I say, the war histories of their families. And what I found was that Gordon Brown's father, who was John Ebenezer Brown, born 1914, graduated with an MA from St Andrews in 1935. He then obtained a Bachelor in Divinity in 1939. And that was the same year he was ordained. And his position in the church meant that he was not on active duty. David Cameron, his father, Ian Donald Cameron, he was, I believe, born with physical disabilities in both legs, and so was also unable to undertake national service. And then Theresa May's father trained for the priesthood in 1940. And by virtue of that, like John Brown, Gordon Brown's father, also avoided active duty. And finally, Jeremy Corbyn, who never took office, but as we know, was leader of the opposition. His father, born 1915, had trained as an engineering apprentice, becoming an electrical engineer. And that was a so-called reserved occupation, which meant that he was in the Home Guard rather than on active duty. And my memory is that these four political leaders were quite strong Remainers, shall we say, quite happy for the sovereignty of this country that, as John said, people fought so hard to preserve, quite happy to have the sovereignty of Britain passed over to the European Federation, the European Union. And I did wonder whether conceivably this family background had something to do with the Remainer attitudes that we saw typifying those four people. And at the same time I was looking into that, I discovered that there was a study very recently, really in 2015, by academics at Chicago University. One was Jean Desity and the other Jason Cowell. And what they concluded, I thought this was really interesting, was that 1-year-old children's propensity to a particular moral behavior was influenced by their parents' sensitivity to justice. In other words, the attitudes of the parents in regard to justice somehow were transmitted down to the next generation. So could there be some link that explains the Remainer attitudes of these political leaders in Britain? Or is this fanciful to imagine this?
May I jump in then, Gloria, and tell you what the absolute link is for being a Remainer? The whole purpose of the European Union is to introduce communism back into Europe. You know, the Soviet Union was a failed experiment. The European Union hopefully will be a failed experiment. But all these people, all these politicians are bought into this idea. I struggle to explain as to why Brexit happened, but I still think we're waiting to see on that. I think there is an ulterior motive for why Brexit happened, which I'm not aware of yet, but there's definitely something being cooked up there. And I would just say to anyone, watch this space. But the overall overriding political situation is to introduce communism to the world. And this is exactly what we're seeing today. And the European Union was the first step down that road. This so-called pandemic that we have going on right now, this is another step down the road to that, as is the next coming crisis, which is obviously climate change, which we're obviously seeing a lot of information coming through about that. Well, I say information, disinformation coming through about that right now. But, you know, again, I would advise everyone to watch this space, because this is not over by a long chalk. The climate change thing will become far more prevalent than the pandemic.
You know what?
Situation.
You know
yeah,
what?
you know what situation.
Better not say that word too often.
Sorry, yeah.
They'll klaxon to start.
I mentioned it once. I think I got away with it.
We got it away. A bit like sort of mentioning the war in front of Germans.
Exactly.
Got away with it, but I think we're all right there. Didn't notice it.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I also wanted to say
agendas within agendas. But
Yeah.
I guess you might agree that the loss of British sovereignty and the sovereignty of other European nations is part and parcel of being part of the European Union. And yet people during the Second World War were fighting to preserve that sovereignty. And many of our political leaders seem to be very happy to just give that away. And I think you, Chris, when we were talking about this earlier, you had something to say about American leaders as well.
That's right.
Presidents, no less.
Presidents, that's right. Because, thanks, Gloria, because the Vietnam War, President Clinton was the right military age to go into Vietnam, but he didn't go because he was at university in Great Britain. Trump was at the right age to go to Vietnam, but he didn't go because he had problems with his heels, which didn't stop him from playing badminton. So, and also George Bush Jr. was the right age to go to Vietnam, and he was in the what's the American? Sorry.
Or was it the National Guard or the Texas
National
Rangers?
Guard, Boy Scouts? I don't know, but
yeah, something like that. But when, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say there that there was actually during the Vietnam War, at least there was an actual waiting list to get into that part of the security system, whatever that was. I can't remember whether it was the Texas Rangers or the National Guard or something. There was a massive long waiting list, but he somehow miraculously managed to get to the head of the queue straight away. So, again, absolutely, he didn't have to go to Vietnam, even though he was of an age to go.
That's right. They dodged it. I know another story about that because a distant relative of mine who had connections managed to get their son into the National Guard. And they never went to Vietnam. So there's a lot of, shall we say, it's not what you know, it's who you know, because this relative of mine, this person, their husband worked in the defence industry. So, yeah, connection. But I don't know too much about them because they are a distant relative. But going on from what I was saying about Lloyd George in 1916, he became the Prime Minister, as I call him, or Prime Minister. And my theory is the banks may now. I've got no evidence at all, but we can only theorise because we don't know. Probably went in and said, "Excuse me, would you like a free piece of lead given to you inserted at the back of your head? Because if you don't stop the Bradbury pound, that's what we're going to give you." That's probably what they said in no uncertain terms. But ask me for the evidence. I ain't got it. But something funny happened, and
it was exactly the same with JFK, wasn't it? I mean, but just before, I mean, a few weeks before he was killed, he introduced, government issued money, which didn't go down very well. Executive Order 11110 from memory, which took away the right of the Federal Reserve to print money, and the American government snatched it back again. And then 3 weeks later, lo and behold, bang.
Yeah. That's it. But after First World War, well, should we go into chat and I'll say a little bit about after the First World War after that. There's something here that I can't read out, but I'll just show it on the screen. Here we go. And actually,
that is Chris, don't you? Yeah. Everyone, that is Dave, the survival guy.
Oh, well, I was going to say, was going to ask the first character on there onto the show, but he's feeling a little queer at the moment. Oh, sorry, I mean ill. As English slang term, I must express that to the American viewers, Right. Right. The word is hubris. That describes most of our psychotic leaders in promoting war as a national good. That's Greg Lord. Thank you, Greg. That's bloody good. That's excellent. Now, this is going to get me onto this next thing in what Salaway has said. It's getting me onto the next part about after the First World War. And it says, Salaway says, wasn't Britain on the verge of civil unrest? Now he says, leading up to World War One. I'm not sure about up to World War One, but I know that after World War One. I stand to be corrected, but I know for a fact it was after World War One. But again, government ordered, this is correct, 2 battleships to Liverpool and pointed guns at the city. Correct. Now, what happened after World War II? The men came back to a country that was been absolutely financially raped by the bankers, because if you would have had debt-free currency, they probably would have come back to a land of milk and honey. But they didn't. They come back to worse poverty than when they left. And of course, they were very peed off about it. And now I'm going back to my memory of when I was a child, and I was very, very young. And I remember the First World War veterans, but of course, as a child, you don't take that much note to what they're saying because they're talking adult talk. But there was a lot of militant organisations that were formed after the First World War, and some of them were mild, like today. Some were mild, some were pretty aggressive, whatever. But there was civil unrest. We were on the verge of a revolution. Now, it's no coincidence that the 1920 Firearms Act was hurriedly introduced, because before 1920 you could buy arms over the counter, similar to the way you can buy arms in some states of the United States today. So they were pretty easy to get. And remember, you had people coming out of the army who were fully trained how to use firearms. A bit dangerous, wasn't it? So you had the Firearms Act that came in, and you can look that up, 1920 Firearms Act. But then, of course, you had these militant organisations, and there was, I know for a fact, there were riots in Luton and all over the country, and people had enough. They'd had a gutful. I believe it's 1918 election was the lowest voting count ever. I believe that to be. So very few people voted, and
well, there was hardly any young men left, were there? Let's face it.
Well, that's right. And what happened is the Secret Service infiltrated these organisations and destroyed them from within by making up terrible things about its leaders and dishing dirt that didn't exist on them. And then, isn't it incredible that in 1921 this marvellous organisation started that told people what they want to hear, and that was the British Legion that started. And it was a pacifist organisation, would you believe? When it started up, it was against war, because it was telling people, and then it became politicised in 1939. But what people don't realise, in 1936, a delegation of 4 people, I think one of them was a vicar, went to Germany for peace talks with Mr. H from the British Legion. You can look that up on Wikipedia, it's all on there. So what got my father, he went through the full 6 years of frontline hell. And I know that, I'll give a little plug for Colin here, his dad was in the Merchant Navy, and he went through on the convoys, the Arctic convoys. He was in on D-Day, he was on the ship at D-Day. It was horrendous what he went through. And because he was in civilian clothing, he was a bit like today, a woman, whilst he's sitting in a pub, spat in his face and said, "You should be in uniform." And he'd been through that. He was in the Merchant Navy, and he got no recognition after the war whatsoever. What he did. My father went through the full 6 years, and he was shocked because conscripts after the war had had enough of the army, because my dad always said he was a civilian in military clothing, and they were shocked to see people that were either conscripted after the war and saw no action, or people that were never there. I'm not saying that everybody was. I don't want loads of complaints. Prancing around with their stomachs out with medals that they bought, making out that they had been, they called it the T-Boy and Just Missed It Brigade. And most of the blokes would be seen dead in military uniform again. And I remember a situation about 5 or 10 years before my father passed away, when he went to St Albans, and it was around about Remembrance Day, and there's one of these chaps standing up with all these medals and that. And he said, "That's interesting." He said, "Was you the American forces?" I said, "No." He said, "Well," he said, "was on," he said, "Was you in D-Day?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I was the first one in." He was on a beach, I think it was Omaha, this bloke said he was on. He said, "Well, that's Americans." And he said, "You've got a Royal Artillery badge on." They didn't go in until about 2 days afterwards, and they were always behind the lines, firing over. "So how do you know so much about it?" He said, "Well, I was actually in the 231 Intelligence Brigade, 2nd Devons." And he just literally ran away. The shock on this bloke's face, because he knew my dad that was actually in that. He'd been found out. He probably wasn't there at all. And when my dad finished his book, we were contacted by a fellow down in Devon that said that he dressed as a D-Day veteran and went round schools lecturing on what it was about, and he needed to read my dad's book because he actually, unfortunately, I like the word unfortunately, missed it all. he did national service in the 1950s and he was too young to be in the war. Yet this bloke was posing as a veteran, and he wasn't. And he actually admitted it, that he goes around the schools telling the children what it was like, and he was making out that he was the first one in on D-Day, and he was a schoolboy at the time.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, Chris, but I'd just like to give your dad's book a shameless plug. I know I plugged it before on the show, but I make no apologies for doing it again, because Chris's dad's book, called My World War II, very appropriately titled, is just one heck of an amazing read. And I'm sure if anyone is interested in that, then, contact Chris, and I'm sure he'd be happy to, let you have a copy. Obviously,
Quite choked, thank you.
Yeah, you have to pay for them, but I'm not suggesting I'll give it you. But it's absolutely a fantastic read. Chris's dad, just for those who are not aware, was on the front line throughout the entirety of the Second World War. It was at just about every major European battle, basically. It's just phenomenal. I mean, how he managed to survive, goodness only knows. I mean, I think he even said that himself, Chris, didn't he? He didn't have a clue how he survived because most of his friends were killed. Just a truly amazing book, and I would highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in that kind of social history, because it is it's not just a military history document, it's a social history document of that time period and the people who served in that war. It's just truly amazing. So please do contact Chris, and I'm sure they'd be happy to supply you with a copy of it.
And did he get recognition on his return, Chris? Your father?
Sorry, a little bit choked.
Did he get, what recognition did he get on his return?
On his return, he got an impressive row of medals, which he didn't want to send for, but you had to send for them. And he never took them out of their cases, because he said, look at the state of them, and I want you to keep them like that and show people. I'd like to show them tonight, but I haven't got them in front of me now. They're all tarnished, frayed, and in a terrible state, and that's how they were issued. And then he got a disability pension, 20% disability pension, and he had to go to a medical board every year. And and I've actually got this on recording. I actually did an interview with him before he died, and they were basically tortured. They went into a room, and they had a board of very educated people firing questions at him. And before he could answer a question, they would then put another question to him, and he had to be carried out often from this board. And they did this with everyone. If a person had a wound, they would move their arm up and down if they had a wound in their arm, and they'd be in absolute agony, and it's all to put them off. And eventually, his pension was stopped because they said that his shell shock was brought on by his childhood. And he went in A1 fit and came out grade E. And then in the late 1980s, the government admitted that they stopped all the pensions incorrectly, and people can reapply, but there's no back pay. So my dad reapplied, and then they've lost the details. He reapplied again, they lost the details again. He reapplied a third time. He had to go up to London and we live in Hertfordshire, to this medical board, and I went with him, and I've never seen it's Monty Python, quite honestly. And it was all drawn out and drawn out and drawn out all the time. It was horrendous. And I call it the government directed pensions fraud, because that's basically what it was. And it was to save money. But also, what people don't realise is they called the troops who have been in a lot of action seasoned troops. And all those, because he was the first wave, assault wave in, next to, he was on Gold Beach, jig section, next to where the film Saving Private Ryan is depicted. And when we saw the film, we had to turn it off after about 10 minutes, because he's saying, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And whoever advised Spielberg wasn't there. And he, I won't go into the explicit details of it, but he said there was tracer bullets all round. And he said how they missed him, he doesn't know. And he strongly believed throughout his life he had a guardian angel over him. And the thing that gets him in films is he said that he said they were deafened afterwards. It was absolutely deafening, because, and you've just got all this, and the noise and the cordite and the smell of everything. And they had to wade through bodies because the Americans had gone in half hour earlier and given the game away, so to speak. So as they're going in, they got the head, torso, so it was red with blood, and they went underwater as they get off, but the landing craft. But what they don't tell you, because I mean, these landing craft grounded prematurely, as they all did, is that those in the first wave were patched up, wounded, and they had their pay books confiscated before D-Day when they was in Hampshire, because they had to go to the New Forest, Hampshire, before they went on D-Day, and they were replaced by new pay books which said that everyone's A1 fit when they hadn't had a medical examination, and they weren't, and they had people that were shell shocked, they had people that were literally patched up and buried just to get them on the beach, so to speak. And he found out many years later that Montgomery expected to have the entire 50th Division that he was in wiped out. And of course, as he was in the frontline intelligence section that had the highest casualty rate, they had to get off the beach and lay markers across a minefield to get so the following wave of troops would be able to safely get across the minefield. Well, they didn't know at that time that the mines, only 1 in 6 mines had been armed because the RAF had bombed the trains carrying the detonators. They had to run across the minefield. He may have trodden on a mine, but luckily it didn't have a detonator in it. But that is just a fraction of what he went through. And a little extra is what I was saying about seasoned troops. Once you was in the front line, you were not relieved. And the reason why is because they wanted to finish you off to save on welfare costs after the war, and people knew that. And when he came back suffering from malaria, because he had a second bout of malaria because he caught it in Sicily, I believe, and everyone that took the malaria tablets caught malaria, but the people that didn't, like my uncle, who threw them over his shoulder, didn't get malaria. And there's something about later ailments that he had that may have been due to the malaria tablets that Shannon in America, I'll send her details, as she's read the book, she's brought out, which is a different subject. But he was put on a draft to go to Burma, which is the most malarious area in the world at that time. I won't say any more than that. Did he go? We'd have to read the book to find out. So that is something that is quite interesting. But another point is that we're told that the French were delighted to be, inverted commas, liberated. No, they made it clear they didn't want to be liberated, and they came up to him and said, "Go home, Tommy." Lots of them. And that to fight French French units that were holding them up so that the German army could regroup. And they never had any of this kissing and cuddling and people coming out waving Union Jacks, because when you see those pictures of French women waving Union Jacks, where did they get them from?
They're all fake. All those films are all staged.
Precisely. And why are the military vehicles so clean, and why are the troops looking so clean when they come ashore? And they're still believed today. And I can go on a little bit. Sorry if I'm going on a little bit, because I'm a bit like an old diesel engine. Once I start, Colin's father was in the Merchant Navy. He went ashore in the Netherlands. I'm not sure what city it is, and probably Colin's watching it saying, "You soppy son, why don't you say that city?" But it was a city, a major city. I think it was 2 weeks after it had been, inverted commas, liberated. And there was bodies of American and British soldiers floating down the canal because the Dutch weren't very pleased about being liberated. And he went into a pub and they got a very cold reception. So I think that, yes, there were some people that were keen to be liberated, but there were some, we're not told the full story. And that is an actual fact that throughout, my father went through France. He got malaria, a second bout, D plus 48 days after D-Day, and was brought back to Britain before being put on a draft to Burma. And everywhere they went, without exception, they got an exceptionally cold reception from people, and it was made known they weren't welcome. So
what we have to remember is that, for anyone who's listening and watching who doesn't know this, that what the Second World War was really about was to keep communism out of Europe. I mean, as far as the Allies were concerned, it was to introduce communism into Europe. But the German side of it was to fight against that communism. And as the war went on, more and more people in Europe realized exactly what was going on. And this is why there were so many different nationalities in the German army, because they joined the German army because they realized that they were fighting to keep communism out of Europe. And, it's a simple fact.
And usury also, John, wasn't it?
Well, it was, of course, yes. But this is why people, they joined the German army and drove from all over the world, not just from Europe. There were more nationalities in the German army than any other army before or since. Something like 100 different nationalities fighting on the side of the Germans to keep communism out of Europe, because this was why the Soviet Union, despite its appalling human rights records, was accepted as an ally, because it was all part of the great agenda. It was all part of the great master plan. It maybe sounds crazy to some people listening to this who's new to this information, but again, I'll give you a little plug for my book here and books here.
Please do.
This is detailed in absolute. The research I did on this is absolutely, comprehensive, shall we say, and it's covered in great detail in my book, specifically Behind the Curtain. This is covered in that massive detail. So I make no apologies for actually pointing people in that direction, because it's important information, and I really believe that everyone should understand our history and exactly what happened. And our history is certainly not what we're told.
And also, this is, if you wish to contact John, this is his email account. And I'd like to make it very, very clear that we're not extreme or anything like that. Very much a pacifist. And quite honestly, we don't go around. I would not wanted to have lived under Mr. H in Germany. I certainly wouldn't, because I don't believe in governments. But I believe in looking at everything from a fair viewpoint. And there's also a very strange twist, because in 1941, the Soviet army were poised to invade Europe. And Mr. H was getting a very good, what do they call it? Come on, brain, feedback from spies and that in the Soviet Union that they were massing on the border. And the plan was, and you know who the Soviet Union was financed by, but we won't say, but what shall we say, Wall Street. And the plan was to sweep through Europe, and they had landing craft ready to actually invade Britain as well. And via Sweden, he kept sending information to London saying, look, please help us, because we will all be communist. Because the German generals said to Mr. H, we won't be able to hold them. We will not, we just can't hold them. So that's why you had Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 to invade the Soviet Union. So when you look at this as a very strange twist, if it wasn't for the German army, in a strange twist there's every possibility that the Russian or the Soviet army would have swept through Europe and we wouldn't have been born. Every possibility, because what is happening now would have happened about 70 years ago. So that's strange. But again, I'm not extremist or anything like that. I'm just looking at truth. But I bet the old trolls are going,
there's so much more to know about the history of the 20th century than we're ever told. And again, I may apologise for saying that I cover all of it, and I mean all of it in Behind the Curtain.
Please read that.
There's a comment in chat there, which I won't read out.
Which one's that?
By Sail Away.
Where are we? Sail Away. I'm actually this.
It starts 100,000. It's that one, and he is absolutely, or she, I beg your pardon, is absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on.
Where are we? I'm just trying to find it, mate.
It's about the fifth last one. So go to the
okay.
very end, and it's the fifth last.
Oh yes. Do you reckon I should dare show it or not?
Well, I don't know.
I won't read it out.
I think we know what he means by choose.
Yes, chewing gum, isn't it?
Of course.
Or maybe Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yes, that'd be the ones. Yeah.
That's the ones. Yes, the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes.
Yeah.
We're not against all, everybody. We're just against psychopaths of certain people.
Not
I'm anti-psychopath.
Not only were there 100,000 of that particular group of people, but there were several generals. Every rank, was full of them. So when you contrast that with the propaganda that we hear about what actually went on in Europe during that time period, I think you'll kind of get the idea that we weren't being told the truth. And
also, sorry, please continue. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I finished, Chris. You carry on. Sorry.
Also, when the Allies got to Berlin, apparently, now I have not checked this out fully myself, so I could be wrong here. But according to, who's that chap? I can't remember his name. He wrote a book. There was an active Church of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you get what I mean. But not Jehovah, but I'm not saying. Stewie has actually written something quite interesting, but I can't read it out. And I won't read it out, obviously. Thanks, mate, but you understand, Yeah. And now also, I'm sorry, Gloria, leaving it out a little bit here. Louise Wilcox said, Mr. Watson wanted non-debt based currency that certainly didn't suit the elite. Yes, that's right. That's why he was let's face it, he was featured in Time magazine. But again, I'm not praising him. I'm not saying he's an angel or anything like that. And again, I would not want to have lived in Germany at that time. But what I'm saying is I'm just looking at it like an outside view without any bias. I'm just looking at it from a non-biased point of view, because again, I'm all for freedom and I'm against government. So that puts me, but that's exactly where I stand,
You're an anarchist, in other words, Chris.
Yeah, sorry?
You're an anarchist, in other words.
Yeah.
Nothing
yes, that's quite true, Stewie. Yes, that's quite true. But no, that's quite something. Now let's have a look on here. Sailaway's coming out some real good ones here. Now this is interesting. The Great Unrest, 1910 to 1914. Thanks, mate. You filled me in here. When the working class shook Britain's capitalist foundations. The miners' strike of 1912. That's why the Titanic. Remember, you were saying there was a strike in 1912, and somehow it got the coal to sail. Do you remember that?
I do. How could I forget?
That's right. How could you forget? I'm just sort of linking it together. Excellent book, by the way. I am reading Behind the Curtain at the moment. 1912 being particularly notable. That's interesting. So, right now, I've been.
Can I? If we're talking books, can I just flag up this book for your viewers? I don't know if you can read that. It's The Secret Origins of the First World War by Jerry Doherty and Jim McGregor. And that, I would say, is a must read on the First World War, describing how a small cabal in London, according to this account, planned the First World War. This was a small British cabal, And their work started, it seemed, way back, according to this account, with novels being written as early as 1903, vilifying the Germans. And so there was a long campaign, if you call this the War Justification Industry, starting as far back as 1903, to put the British population in terror of the German population. And they cite a novel that was written in 1903 by Erskine Childers, The Riddle of the Sands, describing how the German fleet had secret plans to invade across the North Sea. And then there was a book that was serialized in the Daily Mail, no less, by Lord Northcliffe, who was on side in this propaganda effort, according to Doherty and McGregor. And this serialized novel was by William Le Queux, Queux, and apparently Northcliffe actually altered the routes that the author had given, because it went through rural places in the original novel. And Northcliffe altered the routes so that they should go through major urban centres in Britain, such as Sheffield and Chelmsford, to terrify the British population even more. And maps, would you believe it, were published alongside the text to bring this all home even more vividly. The novel was translated into no fewer than 27 languages. How's that for a propaganda effort? On the back of the mania that followed, they say, the Official Secrets Act was passed in 1911. And I love the way they describe it. They said from this, MI5 and MI6 grew into huge departments of national insecurity.
Interesting.
That's quoted on page 151 of their book. And that Official Secrets Act empowered the authorities to arrest without warrant. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
And all affording greater protection, they say, to the secret elite who were pushing for this war. And they ignored overtures of peace from the German Kaiser, didn't pass those on to the cabinet. And I remember Jerry Doherty, who invited to speak at the first Questioning History event that we ran. I remember him saying he went to Kew, to the Public Records Office, to look out cabinet meeting papers. And there were none to be found. Incredible though that may seem, covering that early period before war was declared.
Well, I think it's also important to impart the information that World War I had been planned for 20 years, more than 20 years, since the very beginning of the 1890s. And the thing that facilitated World War I was the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Bank was what financed World War I. And anyone who's read my Titanic books will know that the Federal Reserve was actually created simply due to the fact that the people who were opposing it, the three powerful guys, there were the four altogether, but the three of the four of those powerful people who were opposing the Federal Reserve and had built up a massive following on the eastern seaboard of the US, died on the Titanic in very, very strange circumstances that have never been explained to this day. And this facilitated the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank, which actually came into being in December 1913. It actually opened its doors in spring 1914. And then by that summer, World War I was ready to be promulgated, because the very way that central banks operate is that they create money out of thin air. So in order to finance, and it was a huge financial undertaking to promulgate a world war, that was facilitated by the fact that money could be created out of thin air. So that's exactly what they did and how they did it. So the Federal Reserve actually funded the Russian Revolution as well, or Wall Street did, or but Wall Street was probably just the middleman. But it was that ability to create money from thin air that made the whole undertaking possible in the first place.
Well, that's right. And when you look at the Russian Revolution, it wasn't Russians that actually started it, and because they actually came from America, didn't they? They weren't born in America, but they actually went to America and came back.
Well, yeah, they were trained. They were all trained in America. All the revolutionaries that began the uprising were all trained in America.
Well, I think that if we could go a little bit in chat, and because sorry, I feel a little bit emotional because we don't. Sorry, I pull back a few things, but cheery up. We got here Town Cry. Hello, infiltration instead of invasion. And I often drop a clanger with Town Cry because because of this brainwashing, I'll say Britain. He says no, England, which is quite correct. And you notice at the beginning of the show, especially Agincourt, they got one thing right. It was an English flag, wasn't it? Next to I don't know, some famous actor. Right. I'm not sure this is on the same subject, but I'll read this out. Hang on. Pop and Beans says Pop Beans rather. Great Britain is 2 countries and Wales. There we go. And now Louise Wilcox. Hello, Louise. Has anyone else heard about the collapse of Evergrande in China? They are the company that have been loaning countries loads of money for years with tremendous interest rates. Okay. And true what Kevin Keener says, money talks. And now, Pot Beans, the British fought the Americans because they wanted the same rights as an Englishman, and the Soviet British didn't want that. That's interesting. Now, I think we're going into English law now, but it's nice to put it. Since then, the British have set out to kill English rights and laws. That's a different subject which we can carry over on another occasion. I think that's quite interesting. Now, and then Pop Beans, please excuse me if I can't read all your messages out. I do apologise. I feel very guilty for that, but I can understand we'll be here all night. England made the world great. Britain is now destroying it. All roads lead back to London. British stole your rights, England. Yes, that's interesting. Now we've got here Hatchy about the time the Saxe-Coburn Gotchas changed the name to Windsor, 1917. Everything okay, folks? I love my granddad. And we got here Paul Green had several relatives who went through World War II. None of them or their friends had any time for the British Legion. Yes, a lot of veterans did, and a lot of World War I veterans did as well. Because again, I believe it's a mouthpiece because it projects an image of veterans that's suitable for the government. Hello, all saluting with their medals. Oh, isn't war jolly marvellous? I mean, I do believe we should remember what really happened, but to me, it was just one genocide after another as a population cull.
Just a shout out as well, Chris. It's not just people who died in the war, but there was, on top of that, there were millions who were maimed and, their lives were destroyed by war who didn't actually get killed in the war. And I'd just like to do a little shout out for my 2 grandfathers, actually, because
okay, far away.
My dad was too young to fight in World War II, but both my grandfathers fought in World War One. Both of them, they didn't know each other at the time, obviously, but both were gassed and both survived the war, but they both died in their late 30s because of that. Their health was just destroyed by that. So it's not just people who actually get killed, it's those who, obviously they were a victim of the war. They actually died as a result of the war, but they were never counted in the death stats, obviously. So there is that huge body of people in addition to those that actually get killed outright, of people who are either maimed, seriously maimed, or they die later as a result of their injuries, and these never appear in the statistics.
That's right. And also the veterans' offsprings, because in Australia they did a survey and they discovered that the suicide rate amongst Vietnam veterans' children was 29% higher than the national average. And you can look that up. That's all on the records. And also, when my dad finished his book, I kept getting lots of letters from people. I say letters, which is a little bit before email, because he published it in 2000. So, you know, the internet was just coming on then. From people that offsprings that had actually been, their parents had actually had post-traumatic stress disorder, and it had carried on to the children. And there was a girl that I was contacting me, and she said that she went to a special school because her nerves were so bad. And she said her parents were told that 68% of children in that school, their parents had post-traumatic stress disorder. And I worked with a Polish girl whose mother was in the Polish uprising, and her father was in Lancaster bombers during the war, and they both suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. And she spent her entire life on tranquilizers and antidepressants. And I know somebody whose father was in Malta during the war, and he went on to Leros, which was a failed mission, and was taken prisoner there, and he went through it, and he had post-traumatic stress disorder, and his son committed suicide. And it really choked me because I knew his son. And there's loads, and I could go on and on like this, but when I see today children in a Middle Eastern country, which we're not allowed to mention, that is being absolutely hammered by people in a country that we're not allowed to criticize, I think, what about the children? What it's going to be like for them? Because when a war stops, it carries on emotionally in the minds of people. And if you look at Dr. Bruce Lipton, he's done research to this on epigenetics, and has found that sometimes, say, like what your grandfather went through, John, or what the grandparents went through, Gloria, it can jump a generation, and then you find that the children have got post-traumatic stress disorder from something their grandparents went through that is actually carried on in the genes, which is quite interesting. I mean, when I was a child, if somebody would come into a room and just slap their hands, I'd have run under the table, absolutely terrified. But I didn't know what I was terrified of. I was shaking like a leaf, thinking, and that is, I now realise what it was. And I thought everybody did that. I thought everybody would jump under the table terrified. I didn't know, you know. So I think that when a war may have stopped in the hearts and minds of people in, they say, 1945, but it still carries on for possibly 100 years afterwards. And that's something else that's overlooked. So,
the other thing, of course, is that, you know, after, what happened immediately after World War II, where it went straight, there was no gap, there was no break. We went straight into the Cold War, you know, and the Cold War was just designed to terrify people because, you know, and people were terrified. I think I've probably said this before ad nauseum, but when I was a kid at school, it was quite a normal thing to do what we called civil defense drills. You know, we had to hide under our desks, you know, as a drill in case of nuclear attack, and it was terrifying. It was traumatic for, you know, for 7-8-year-old kids, you know, such as I was at that time. Yeah, and my parents were terrified. My parents lived in fear of this non-existent nuclear threat, because it is non-existent. I'll tell you, nuclear weapons do not exist. You know, and for proof of that, just read my book, Falsification of Science. It's very easy to prove that it's all a hoax. You know, even the so-called nuclear attacks
as well.
World War II. Yeah, well, we know all about those. Then we know all about hoaxes, don't we? Yeah.
Well, that's right. And
actually, some people describe that as another form of war.
World War III, Gloria. It is World War III.
The word you just put up and everything around it. Another form of,
just put it up again. Here we go.
You know, another version of war that you know, it's quite difficult after the histories that we've talked about to galvanize a public to go to war anymore. I mean, we haven't talked about the Iraq War, the war against Gaddafi. Maybe we should spend a few minutes. But after all of that, conventional warfare is probably not the easiest thing to bring off anymore. So, we have wars in a different form today. And I was listening to a senior solicitor the other day on the radio, and you may have heard her too, Anna de Buisseret. And she was saying she was talking to veterans, and that these veterans were describing what was happening to the general population today as military-grade psychological warfare. What's happening to the general population, probably not just in this country, but worldwide. And I sat up when I heard her say that. She's a very, very coherent, rational sort of person. But we've talked about the effects on we've talked about the effects on those who engage in war. What about the effects on the populations that are targeted? I wonder if we should talk about that a little bit. For example, Gaddafi was the part of the war justification industry, from what I've read, involves demonization of the enemy's leaders. And arguably, you can see this happening repeatedly, both with the war against Gaddafi, the war against Milosevic, and so on and so forth. And I've read this in what you've written, John, one of your blogs, I think. You wrote about what Gaddafi was doing for his population. So will you forgive me if I read back what I read you saying, that under his leadership, literacy had increased from 20% to 83%. He nationalized the nation's oil reserves. That can't have endeared him to the global population. He built one of the finest healthcare systems in the third world, I think you wrote. He raised life expectancy from 44 to 75 years of age, developed huge irrigation projects. Any Libyan who wanted to become a farmer was given free use of land, a house, farm equipment, livestock, and seed. So what happened to all of that after his demise?
Good question.
The population of Libya, did that all disappear? Did they regress?
I'm aware it did, yeah. I mean, what really was the final nail in Gaddafi's coffin was that he wanted to stop trading oil for US dollars. He introduced something called the gold dinar, or he wanted to introduce something called the gold dinar, which was a new currency that was going to be used for oil trading. And of course, that didn't go down very well in certain quarters that are, that particularly use the US dollar. So that kind of signed his death sentence right there and then. But all this nonsense that they were saying about him being a dictator and a tyrant, he used to ride about in open top cars. The people of Libya absolutely loved him. He was never subjected to an assassination attempt, ever. Like I say, he stood on balconies. He rode about in open top cars without a problem. And obviously, he defied the globalist powers, and that was his crime, and he paid a very, very heavy price for it. The poor guy, and I mean, he really suffered even in death. I mean, he had a terrible death. What they did to him was just unspeakable, and it's certainly not fit to talk about on a podcast such as this. Just truly, utterly sick and depraved.
And do you remember Hillary Clinton?
Who could forget her?
Horrendous. I mean, if that's not psycho, allegedly, I don't know what is. It just it's dignity. And I'm still trying to find out what these terrible atrocities that Gaddafi did. Actually, they haven't showed you, have they? Because I remember the media was wrapping it up. All the atrocities. What atrocities? They haven't found the mass graves yet, have they? And things like that.
No.
If I could just cut in there, I'm terribly sorry. I was very rude earlier. Please accept my apology.
Stop
I've got
apologising.
here,
Done with it.
town crier. Come on, everyone. Hit the like and share button. Oh, and also ding the little bell. That's the other. Thanks, town crier. I always, excuse my language, I always bleeding forget that, don't I? Every week, I sort of say, press the button for, we end the show. And oh, sod it, I forgot to say that. So it's stick the old thumb up, press the like, and ding the little bell. That's the other one, ding the bell. So I'm sorry about that. So I had to put that one in. So sorry, you were saying there was a build up. You were telling me before the show, Gloria. There's different stages of build up where you dehumanize the enemy, etc. If you could reinforce that.
Oh yes, I was reading a commentator who said that the standard technique, the rollout of the propaganda, begins with the demonization of the leader. And we've talked about that in relation to Gaddafi. Apparently, viewers will think of other people. Milosevic, ? The butcher of the Balkans, purportedly. I think he was trying to preserve the sovereignty of Yugoslavia. And I'm no expert on this, but I understand that Yugoslavia was the only country that didn't apply for membership either of the European Union or of NATO. Mm-hmm. And according to Keenan, I think he was manning the US desk for Yugoslavia. His crime, a bit like John said about Gaddafi, was that he didn't toe the Western line.
It's like the globalist, Gloria. That's what
it wasn't. Here we are. I'm going to quote him verbatim. Hang on a second. Kenny, yes, George Kenny, former Yugoslavia desk officer. He said that in post-Cold War Europe, no place remained for a large, independent-minded socialist state that resisted globalization. And that was precisely, according to him, what Milosevic was trying to do. And you remember he was incarcerated in The Hague. He was denied the medical treatment that he was seeking. And he died in 2006, I think in mysterious circumstances. He led his own defense, I believe. He'd studied law at university. And he led his own defense from his cell. And it was 11 years after his suspicious death, in a Dutch prison, that the International Tribunal in The Hague quietly acknowledged his innocence.
I didn't know that.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've really dropped a good one there, haven't you? That is really, that's a real, what you call tea choking statement, that one is.
And I was trying to explain this to a friend who I haven't seen for many years today, that stage one is the demonization of the leader, and here's an example, and that he was eventually found innocent long after his death, and these thoughts were met with complete incredulity by the person I was speaking to. Well, of course, we've all been subjected to many years of media narrative on this subject. So I suppose if you come out with this, you'll sound a little bit peculiar, won't you? In certain circles.
That's right.
So that's stage one. Stage two, according to the commentator, is to start demonizing the collective, not just the individual leader. And I think the example I gave you of Alcibiades, do you remember in 5th century Athens, running down the Sicilians as a mixed rabble? He described them as a mixed rabble who have no deep sense of patriotism, are poorly armed, poorly fortified, every man for himself. That was a good example of the demonization of the people. I mean, of course, it had no bearing in reality at all, what Alcibiades was saying. But it roused the Athenians to action. And this targeting of the people in general, according to Doherty and McGregor in their book, this was happening substantially through the newspapers before and during World War I, particularly in Lord Northcliffe's papers. And the authors talk about the papers having the media effort poisoning the minds of a whole generation through the anti-German spin that was put out by Northcliffe's papers. He had the Times under his wing, the Observer, the Sunday Times, the Daily Mail, the Daily Mirror, the Evening News, the Evening Post, and others, all under a single person's ownership.
And of course, in the First World War, just to sort of kind of expand on that point a little bit, Gloria, we had all these atrocity stories about German soldiers raping nuns in Belgium and sticking babies with bayonets, and it was all lies, absolute lies. None of it happened. But
and so that's stage 2. Stage 3.
Sorry, Gloria.
Yeah. The final stage is continued reporting of atrocities, and I think that's where what you've just said fits in, John. And question marks on some of the atrocities that are reported in our recent past in the Middle East. A chemical attack comes to mind. Questions have been asked about that chemical attack.
Babies in incubators.
Babies in incubators, yeah.
Babies in incubators being thrown out.
It's difficult to discern the truth. I mean, I'm not necessarily taking a position on that, but questions must be asked. I think people need to be aware of the processes through which the propaganda machine works. These processes of demonization and highlighting atrocities. And it behoves us to put our thinking caps on and look very, very carefully at the evidence.
But we never hear about the atrocities that are perpetrated by so-called our side. Those just get covered up, swept under the carpet totally. I'm thinking of a particular atrocity towards the end, at the end of the Second World War, which again, I don't want to kind of go into in great detail on this platform. But again, it's all covered in my books. It was something called the Rhine Meadows Killing Fields. I would urge everyone to look at that. That is a real eye-opener as to how we are being permanently deceived and propagandized.
So that ship, wasn't it, the hospital ship, the German hospital ship that was bombed and strafed by, which was clearly Red Cross on the side, by, I believe it was British
Wilhelm Gustloff.
That's right, yes. That's all been swept under the carpet, hasn't it?
Yeah, that was the death toll on that was 6 times that of the Titanic. Yeah, it's never mentioned in our histories, never.
Actually, I'd like to get Monica Schaefer on here because what you was talking about, those death fields, or Eisenhower's death fields as they were called, her father was actually in there and managed to escape. So she would be a very interesting person to have on, but I think BitChute. And by the way, may I mention that I've made a breakthrough on our BitChute channel. It's not mentioned as I speak at the moment underneath the comment, information part of underneath this video yet. But I'll add that on, a link to our BitChute channel, because what I'll do, I aim to record these programs and then put it on BitChute just in case. And also, I'd like to do a little call out, which I forgot to do. At the beginning of this show, I mentioned 2 German stretcher bearers who bravely saved a lot of lives. And I get a little bit choked when I think about it, because my father witnessed it. So it's true, my father witnessed what happened, and he shook hands with them. And about 10 years before, soon after we did the book, we actually sent to Classic FM and asked, he wrote a nice little piece. And he said, I'd like to dedicate some music to them. And it's ever so good at Classic FM. They did what they normally do, ignored us. Completely ignored us. We also sent to German newspapers, and Das Welt came back, it's the only newspaper, and asked, my dad wasn't fit enough to go down to London at that stage. I worked in London, so I went along to their offices and I got interviewed by one of the journalists there, and they didn't print it. So
what a surprise!
Right, slapped my thigh. And it's funny, the journalist that interviewed me was a Jehovah's Witness. Isn't that weird?
Very.
And sorry, I'm not. And I won't go to that. Anyway, what I was going to say, I'm not against anybody. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against anybody at all, because I'll say I think there's two types of people in this world: psychopaths who are not people, and humans. And I like humans. I don't like psychopaths. Anyway, that's out of the way. What I was going to say, if I know I get German viewers to this show, as well as people from the Netherlands, America, Thailand, Australia, Canada, all over the place. So if you know of this story, if you know it might have been a relative, it might have been somebody you've known, it's a really long shot. I very much doubt it, but it's worth calling out. I'd love to know that. It's doubtful they're alive now. They'd be about 100 years of age. They might be, but I hope they had a long and happy life, and bless them, because they're absolutely, that's bravery, because they had to be ordered to stop going out collecting the wounded because it was against the Geneva Convention. You know, and when they left, most of the blokes were in tears, choked, because they were such marvellous characters. So, you know, if it wasn't for them, there's a lot of people that wounded that survived the war thanks to them. So if you're in Germany and you know anything about this, anything more, please let me know. But it's a very long shot. I very much doubt it, but it's worth the call out for them. So that's who, you know, I remember also, as I think Town Crier said, is the civilians as well. All the civilians killed. Just think about it. Because once upon a time, before the First World War, battles were away from civilians, apart from the Boer War. That was a bit different. That involved civilians. But most of the time, when you go back in time, you know, they're all generally away from civilians. But when aerial bombing came about, then civilians were more involved, much more involved. And it's an interesting one here. The orgasm will be abolished. That was Orwell. Well, we won't know where we're coming or going, will we? I'm sorry. That's quite something. Anyway, we've been up to our time. I think we've gone over time.
I've stayed our welcome, I think.
Yes, right. Anything you'd like to round off with, John, Gloria, John? Anything?
After you, Gloria, if you've got something to say.
I think we should remember all of those who have been involved in all the warfare that we've mentioned, whether as civilians or fighting people. And as Thucydides said back in the 5th century BC, learn the lessons. I mean, you know, how many hundreds of years is it between then and now? Is it not time that we learned the lessons? And I think the War Justification Industry, as Chris has so aptly called it, is something that everybody should learn about, so that when we're faced with this again, we can be on the alert and ready to ask questions about it. So that's what I'd like to say. I'd also like to just give a little plug for the conference that's coming up next month. John's speaking at, giving 3 talks. Can't wait. That's questioning history, which is what we've been doing this evening, and we need to continue to do. Thank you very much, Chris. In Sussex.
East Sussex, isn't it? That's wrong at the top, isn't it?
Yes. And some wonderful speakers and wonderful people come along. So if you'd like something to cheer you up during the darkness, do come and join us all there. And you've got the contact details there. Learning holidays at protonmail.com, and we'll see you there. John, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to echo your sentiments there, Gloria. And just regarding the conference, I would just say that the one that I attended exactly a year ago, well, it will be a year by the time the next one comes around at the same venue. It was one of the most uplifting, fantastic experiences I've ever had. I mean, seriously, I did 2 talks last year, and I'm doing 3 this year, along with some great speakers like Mark Devlin and Dave Murphy, who's absolutely spot on. I can't wait to meet Dave, actually, because he's kind of a hero of mine. And yeah, I would urge everybody to just come along, and we can meet up. We're going to have a fantastic time. It'll be an absolutely brilliant weekend. Obviously, there won't be any social distancing or masks or anything like that. And so, yeah, I would encourage everyone to at least take a look at it. And if you are able to, if you want to, then both Dory and I will be absolutely delighted to welcome you along and meet you there. Yeah, and that's about it from me. I think, as I said, we've probably outstayed our welcome now. So
That's right.
I'll hand back to Chris, and you can round it
Thank
off.
you very much. Actually, I must add these 2 in. Stewie's come up with the Gustav, sung by a Russian sub. I don't know.
Yeah, the Wilhelm Gustloff. That's what I mentioned before.
Yeah, it was Russian, but I thought it was RAF that bombed it. I didn't realise it was Russian sub.
No, and the Russian submarine commander who committed that appalling atrocity was given the highest military honours that a Russian could get during the Second World War, and that was Hero of the Soviet Union.
Well, I'm wrong there. I thought it was. I'm terribly sorry. I was totally wrong there on that one. I'm getting muddled up with another ship that was sunk. So
Maybe.
sorry that. Most Allied World War II vets didn't like talking about the war because they were ashamed of what they witnessed. That's very interesting. There's all different reasons. And Town Cry, I'm so sorry I can't read everyone's out. He's come out with a good statement here. That's very kind. Thank you. This has been a great show. I think we could quite easily have another show about this. Mm-hmm. Well, now I can get on to BitChute. We're thinking of we're calling it the Naughty Channel, what we can't say on here. And we will have a recorded program with naughty people that we can't have on here because they're banned from here. So
let's just say we can be a lot more frank and open about what we're talking about, rather than trying to couch it in very kind of, shall we say, more easily digestible terms.
That's right.
We can be a lot more open on a different channel, because obviously we've got to be careful on here.
That's right. And well, I hope this isn't. They don't give us the boot on this one. So if if it can be recorded, so I'm going to try and record it as quickly as possible. And I think that's wise. And you'll be able to see it on BitChute. I'm going to put the recording on BitChute in the next couple of days. And what's this? This is Andy. I'm glad he's put on. Can you do last post as an opening? Yes, we can do. Played by yourself, of course, who is an excellent bugle player and trumpet player, because last Thursday, it's the first, I've never been to a remembrance ceremony before because obviously my views, but Andy played, ADB played on there. And hello, I've gone off. Am I still on here? Can you still hear me? Oh, I'm again. I must have said something I mustn't have said, and it says, yes, as long as you can play it. How's that? So I'm not saying sort of coming to go, it was brilliant. It really was. Well, he is a professional player, but I believe he is, but absolutely brilliant. And I saw him perform the opening, and it really was incredible. But I walked away when all the, shall we say, rajamataz started. And so I politely saw him, but me and another person, we politely withdrew. And because I found that it was a lot of hypocrisy that was being said. So that's the reason why. But I'm still respectful. I respect the people that's there. And I do believe we should always have a remembrance. But let's incorporate a full remembrance like I did tonight with those stretcher bearers. I can only mention 2, and there's a lot more I could mention. Like I was in contact with a German chap who was in the Weimar, and he saved the life of a paratrooper. So there was a lot that went on, a lot of humanity that went on in the battlefield. So thank you very much. Next week, same time, same place, and I think it's Operation Bluebeam with
Project Bluebeam.
Sorry,
Project Bluebeam.
and that as well. Blimey, well, Project Blue. I thought it was Operation Bluebeam. Oh, Project Bluebeam with John Hamer, and the week after that, it's the Great Fraud of London, 1666, with Gloria. So, you mean the Great Fire, don't you? No, the Great Fraud of London, 1666. So remember to, I remembered it this week. Put the thumbs up, subscribe, and ding the little bell. But the most important thing, have a laugh. That's the best thing. And good night, and thank you very much, everyone.